The bride stumbled into North Platte, Nebraska, on a sweltering August afternoon in 1878. Her cream-colored wedding dress stained with dust and dried blood, one hand clutching her swollen belly as another contraction ripped through her body. Amelia Zimmerman had been married for exactly 4 hours before her husband's wagon overturned on the treacherous mountain pass 20 miles outside of town. Thomas had died instantly when the wheel axle snapped and sent them careening off the narrow trail. She had crawled from the wreckage, bruised and battered, her labor pains beginning as she lay there beside his broken body. For 6 agonizing hours, she had walked, stumbled, and dragged herself toward the distant smoke of civilization, driven by the primal need to save her unborn child even as her own life seemed to be slipping away with every painful step. The main street of North Platte stretched before her like a wavering mirage. Wooden storefronts lined the dusty thoroughfare, and she could hear the distant sound of a piano playing in one of the saloons. People stopped and stared as she lurched forward, but no one moved to help. Her reputation had preceded her, it seemed. Thomas had told her that North Platte was a small town, and small towns had long memories. Her husband had left this place 5 years ago under a cloud of gambling debts and broken promises, and now she was paying the price for his past mistakes. Amelia made it to the first door with a painted sign that read, "Mrs. Harriet Coleman, Midwife and Healer." She pounded on the wood with whatever strength remained in her trembling fist. The door opened a crack, and a thin-faced woman with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun peered out. "Please," Amelia gasped. "My baby is coming. I need help." Mrs. Coleman's eyes widened with recognition, though they had never met. "You are Thomas Zimmerman's widow." "Yes, he just died. The wagon accident, please. I need." The door slammed shut. Amelia heard the bolt slide into place. She stood there, swaying, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Another contraction seized her, and she doubled over, crying out in pain. When it passed, she stumbled to the next building, a general store where the proprietor's wife was known to help with births. The woman took one look at her and shook her head. "I am sorry, but I cannot help you. Your husband owed my brother $300. He lost our family farm in a card game and never paid what he promised. I cannot help the wife of that man." Amelia felt tears streaming down her face. "Please, I had nothing to do with that. I only met Thomas 3 months ago. Please, my baby." The woman's expression softened for just a moment, but then hardened again. "I am sorry, truly, but I cannot." The door closed, and Amelia was alone again on the street. She tried 3 more homes, each time receiving the same cold refusal. Thomas's debts and betrayals ran deep in this town, and no one was willing to look past his sins to help his innocent wife and child. By the time the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson, Amelia had been turned away by every midwife, every doctor, and every woman who might have offered assistance. She found herself at the edge of town, leaning against a water trough, her body shaking with exhaustion and fear. The contractions were coming faster now, and she knew with terrible certainty that her baby would be born soon, with or without help. She would likely die out here in the street, and her child with her, all because of a man's past mistakes. "Madam, you need help." The voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolling over stone. Amelia looked up through her tears and saw the largest man she had ever encountered. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the setting sun. His arms were thick with muscle, visible even through the worn fabric of his buckskin shirt. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and a full beard covered the lower half of his face. His eyes were in startling shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the mountains, and they were filled with concern as they took in her desperate state. "They will not help me," Amelia whispered. "No one will help me." The man knelt beside her, his massive frame somehow gentle as he reached out to steady her. "Why the hell not? My husband, Thomas Zimmerman, he wronged people here. They hate him. Now they hate me." Recognition flickered in those gray-blue eyes. "Thomas is your husband," Amelia felt her heart sink. "He was. He died today. The wagon accident." "Please, if you knew him. If he wronged you too, I understand, but please, just help me get somewhere safe before." Another contraction cut off her words, and she cried out, clutching at the stranger's arm. The man did not pull away. Instead, he waited until the pain passed, his large hand supporting her back. "I am Brett Rawlins. Thomas and I had our differences, but I do not make women and babies pay for their father's mistakes. Can you stand? My cabin is about 2 miles up in the foothills. It is not much, but it is clean and safe." "I do not think I can walk 2 miles, Amelia said, her voice breaking. Brett Rawlins did not hesitate. He simply scooped her up into his arms as though she weighed nothing at all, despite her pregnant belly and the heavy, ruined wedding dress. Amelia gasped in surprise, but he was already moving, carrying her with long, purposeful strides away from the town that had rejected her. "Wait, you cannot just carry me all that way," she protested weakly. "Watch me," Brett said simply. He walked without stopping, without slowing. His breathing barely labored despite the weight he carried, and the steep incline they began to climb. Amelia found herself pressed against a chest that felt as solid as the mountain itself. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong, and somehow that rhythmic sound calmed her panic slightly. Every time a contraction came, Brett would slow his pace but never stop, murmuring words she could not quite hear, but that sounded soothing nonetheless. The sun had nearly set by the time they reached his cabin. It was a sturdy log structure built into the side of the mountain, with a stone chimney and a small covered porch. Brett kicked open the door and carried her inside, laying her gently on the only bed in the single room. The cabin was sparse but clean, with basic furnishings and supplies neatly organized on shelves. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and there was a table with 2 chairs, a trunk, and various tools and equipment that spoke of a man who lived alone and lived simply. "I am going to start a fire and get water heating," Brett said, his voice tight with barely controlled tension. "Then I am going to help you, but I need you to know something first. I have never delivered a baby before. I have helped with foaling horses and calving cattle, but never a human child. I am probably going to be terrible at this, and I am scared out of my mind, but I am not going to let you face this alone." Despite everything, despite the pain and fear, Amelia felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep inside. It came out as a half-sob. "I have never had a baby before either." "I am terrified too." Brett's bearded face cracked into a small, worried smile. "Well then, I guess we will figure it out together." He moved with surprising efficiency for such a large man, building up the fire, hanging a pot of water over the flames, gathering clean cloths and blankets. Amelia watched him through waves of pain, noting the way his hands shook slightly as he worked, the set of his jaw that revealed his anxiety. Here was a man who had faced God knew what dangers in these mountains, who looked like he could wrestle a bear and win, and he was terrified of helping her give birth. Somehow, his honesty about his fear made her feel less alone. "Tell me what to do," Brett said, kneeling beside the bed. His hands were clasped in front of him and she could see them trembling. "Tell me what you need." "I do not know," Amelia admitted. "My mother died when I was young. I never learned. The midwife was supposed to tell me." "All right," Brett said, taking a deep breath. "All right, we can do this." Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, right? Your body knows what to do. We just have to not mess it up too badly. Another contraction hit, stronger than before, and Amelia screamed. Brett grabbed her hand, letting her squeeze until she thought she might break his fingers, but he did not flinch. When the pain subsided, she found him staring at her with those storm cloud eyes, and she saw something there beyond fear. She saw determination and kindness and a fierce protectiveness that made her throat tighten with emotion. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "I cannot keep calling you madam while we do this." "Amelia. Amelia Zimmerman." "Amelia," he repeated, and somehow her name sounded different in his deep voice. "That is a beautiful name. I am going to take care of you, Amelia. You and your baby are going to be fine, I promise you that." She wanted to tell him not to make promises he could not keep, but another contraction was building, and all she could do was grip his hand and ride out the wave of agony. The hours that followed blurred together into a nightmare of pain and fear. Brett never left her side. He brought her water and helped her drink. He placed cool cloths on her forehead when she burned with fever. He held her hand and let her scream and curse and cry. When she was certain she could not go on, when the pain became so overwhelming that she begged for death, he leaned close and spoke directly into her ear. "You are the strongest woman I have ever seen," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You walked 6 hours through the wilderness after watching your husband die. You came to a town that rejected you and you kept fighting. You are not going to give up now. Your baby needs you to be strong, and I know you can do this." "I cannot," she sobbed. "I cannot do this anymore." "Yes, you can," Brett insisted. "Look at me, Amelia, look at me." She forced her eyes open and found his face inches from hers, his gray-blue eyes intense and unwavering. "You can do this," he said again. "I believe in you. I know we just met, but I can see what you are made of, and you have the strength to do this. Trust yourself, trust your body, and trust me to be here with you every step of the way." Something in his words, in the absolute conviction in his voice, gave her strength she did not know she possessed. She nodded, gripping his hand tighter, and prepared herself for the next contraction. As the night deepened, Brett had to check her progress. His hands shook so violently he had to pause and steady himself first. "I am sorry," he said, his face flushed. "I am going to try to be as gentle as I can." "It is all right," Amelia said, though she was mortified by the intimacy of the situation. But there was no one else, and her baby's life depended on this stranger's willingness to help despite his obvious discomfort. Brett examined her with shaking hands, his face a mask of concentration. "I think I can see the baby's head," he said, his voice tight. "I think it is almost time. When the next contraction comes, you need to push. Can you do that?" Amelia nodded, gathering every ounce of strength she had left. The next hour was the longest of her life. She pushed until she thought her body would tear apart. Brett guided her through it, his hand steadier now that action was required, his voice constant and encouraging. She could see sweat dripping down his face, could see the tension in every muscle of his powerful body as he willed her through the ordeal. "I can see more of the head," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "You are doing so well, Amelia. Just a little more, just a little more." She pushed again, screaming with the effort, and suddenly Brett's eyes went wide. "The head is out," he said, and she heard the wonder in his voice. "Oh God, Amelia, the head is out. One more push, just one more, come on, you can do this." Amelia bore down with every last bit of strength she possessed, and suddenly the pressure released. A thin, wailing cry filled the cabin, and she collapsed back against the pillows, gasping for breath. Brett stood there with shaking hands, holding the tiniest, most perfect baby girl Amelia had ever seen. He was staring at the child with an expression of absolute awe, tears streaming down his bearded face. "You did it," he whispered. "You did it, Amelia. She is perfect. She is absolutely perfect." He moved quickly then, wrapping the baby in clean cloths the way he had seen done with newborn foals, his large hands surprisingly deft despite their trembling. He tied off the cord with string, cut it with a clean knife, and then, very gently, placed the baby in Amelia's arms. Amelia looked down at her daughter and felt her heart expand so suddenly, it was almost painful. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when she opened her eyes for a brief moment, Amelia saw they were blue. She was tiny and red and wrinkled, and absolutely the most beautiful thing Amelia had ever seen. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, my sweet girl, you are safe now. We are both safe." Brett sank down onto the floor beside the bed, his whole body shaking with exhaustion and emotion. He put his face in his hands, and Amelia realized he was crying. "Thank you," she said softly. "Brett, thank you. You saved our lives." He looked up at her, his eyes red and shining with tears. "I have never been so terrified in my entire life," he admitted. "My hands would not stop shaking. I was sure I was going to do something wrong." "You were perfect," Amelia said firmly. "You were exactly what we needed." They sat there in the quiet cabin, lit only by firelight, and Amelia felt something shift in her chest. This man, this stranger who had every reason to turn his back on her just like everyone else in that terrible town, had instead carried her to safety and delivered her baby with his own trembling hands. He had been gentle when she needed gentleness, strong when she needed strength, and vulnerable enough to let her see his fear. In that moment, she felt a connection to him that she could not explain, something deeper than gratitude, something that settled into her bones like warmth after a long cold. Brett finally pulled himself together and stood up. "You need to rest," he said. "I will clean up and keep the fire going. There is more I should probably do, I just do not know what." "We need to deliver the afterbirth," Amelia said quietly, her knowledge coming from half-remembered conversations she had overheard years ago. Brett's eyes widened. "Oh, right. I forgot about that part." It happened naturally a short time later, and Brett dealt with it efficiently despite his continued nervousness. Then he brought Amelia more water and helped her drink, adjusted her pillows, and made sure both she and the baby were warm and comfortable. "I am going to sleep on the floor," he said. "You take the bed. I will be right here if you need anything." "Brett," Amelia said as he turned to gather blankets, "what was between you and Thomas? You said you had differences." Brett paused, his broad shoulders tensing. Then he sighed and turned back to face her. "Thomas and I were friends years ago. Best friends, actually. We grew up together in this territory. Then he fell in with some rough men, got into gambling and drinking. He borrowed money from me, a lot of money, to pay off a gambling debt. Promised he would pay me back within 6 months. That was 5 years ago. I never saw a cent of it. But more than that, he lied to my face over and over, made promises he never intended to keep. Eventually, I realized he was not the man I thought he was, and I told him to leave town and never come back. I guess he did for a while at least." Amelia felt her heart sink. "I am sorry. I did not know. He never told me about his past, about any of this. We met 3 months ago in Kansas City. He was charming and kind, and I was alone and foolish. We married quickly, and he said we were coming west to start fresh. He told me he had family here who would welcome us." "He lied," Brett said gently. "That is what Thomas did best." "I know that now," Amelia said quietly. She looked down at her sleeping daughter. "But I cannot regret the choices that led me to her, even if everything else was built on lies." Brett's expression softened. She is lucky to have a mother who thinks like that, and for what it is worth, I do not hold Thomas's debts against you. You did not know him back then. You are not responsible for his mistakes. That is more than anyone else in this town believes, Amelia said bitterly. This town has its fair share of self-righteous fools, Brett said. Thomas hurt a lot of people and they want someone to pay, but you are not that someone. And I will make damn sure they understand that once you are strong enough to go back down there. I cannot go back, Amelia said, panic rising in her chest. They will not help me. They will not, shh, Brett said, kneeling beside the bed again. You do not have to think about that now. Right now, you just need to rest and heal and take care of your baby. Everything else can wait. You are safe here. I promise you that. Amelia wanted to argue, to point out that she could not stay in his cabin indefinitely, that she had nowhere to go and no way to support herself and her child. But exhaustion was pulling her under like a tide, and the baby was warm in her arms, and Brett's steady presence made her feel safer than she had felt in months. So she closed her eyes and let sleep claim her. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the cabin's small windows. The baby was fussing beside her, and Brett was sitting at the table, carving something from a piece of wood. He looked up immediately when he heard her stirring. "How are you feeling?" he asked, standing and coming over to the bed. "Sore," Amelia admitted. "Very sore, but alive thanks to you." "The baby needs to eat," Brett said, looking uncomfortable. "I do not know much about that, but I know she needs to nurse. Do you need help with anything?" Amelia felt her cheeks flush. "I think I can manage. Could you perhaps turn around?" Brett immediately spun to face the wall, and Amelia almost laughed at how quickly he moved. She arranged her clothing and helped the baby latch on, which took several tries and left them both frustrated. But eventually, the baby began to nurse, and Amelia felt a rush of relief and joy so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. "You can turn around now," she said softly. Brett turned, and when he saw her nursing the baby, his expression was so tender it made Amelia's breath catch. "You both look beautiful," he said simply. They spent the morning quietly. Brett made a simple breakfast of bacon and eggs, which tasted like the finest meal Amelia had ever eaten. He heated water so she could wash herself, discreetly taking himself outside while she cleaned up and changed into one of his oversized shirts, since her wedding dress was ruined beyond repair. When he came back inside, he found her standing by the window, the baby in her arms, wearing his shirt like a dress. "I need to go into town today," Brett said. "We need proper supplies for you and the baby. Clean clothes, blankets, food, medicine in case either of you develops a fever. And I need to tell the sheriff about Thomas's death." Fear shot through Amelia. What if they will not let you buy supplies for us? What if they refuse to help again? Brett's jaw set in a hard line. "They will help. I will make sure of it. I am not without influence in this town, despite preferring to live up here away from most of them. And anyone who gives me trouble will answer to me personally." There was something in his tone that made Amelia believe him. This was a man who could be very dangerous when he chose to be, even if he had been nothing but gentle with her. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I do not know how I will ever repay you for everything you have done." "You do not need to repay me," Brett said firmly. "I did what any decent person would do." "But no one else did," Amelia pointed out. "Only you." Brett looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. He grabbed his hat and headed for the door. "I will be back before dark. Keep the door barred while I am gone. There are rifles on the wall if you need them, though I do not expect any trouble. But I would rather you be prepared." After he left, Amelia explored the cabin more fully. It was clear that Brett lived a simple but organized life. Everything had its place. His clothes were neatly folded in the trunk. His tools were well maintained and carefully stored. There were books on a shelf, which surprised her until she remembered that he had spoken with intelligence and kindness, not like some rough mountain man with no education. She picked up one of the books and saw it was a collection of poetry by Walt Whitman. Another was a well-worn copy of Robinson Crusoe. This man had depths she had not expected. The baby slept most of the day, waking only to nurse. Amelia found herself thinking about Brett constantly, wondering what he was doing in town, worrying that people would give him trouble for helping her. She also found herself thinking about his hands, so large and strong yet so gentle when he touched her or the baby. She thought about his eyes, the way they had looked at her with such concern and determination. She thought about the tears he had cried when he delivered her daughter, the honest emotion he had not tried to hide. She barely knew this man, and yet she felt drawn to him in a way she had never felt drawn to Thomas. Her marriage had been a mistake, born of loneliness and poor judgment. Thomas had been charming but shallow, she realized now. He had told her what she wanted to hear but had never really seen her, never really cared about her beyond what she could provide for him. In less than a day, Brett had shown her more genuine care and respect than Thomas had in 3 months of marriage. It was late afternoon when she heard horses approaching. Amelia's heart began to race, and she went to the window, peering out cautiously. Relief flooded through her when she saw Brett's massive form riding up the trail, leading a second horse laden with supplies. She unbarred the door and stepped out onto the porch as he dismounted. He looked tired but satisfied, and when he saw her standing there with the baby in her arms, his face lit up with a smile that transformed his entire appearance. "You got everything," she said, looking at all the bundles and packages. "I got everything and then some," Brett confirmed. "Mrs. Anderson at the general store tried to refuse me at first, but I explained the situation in terms that made it clear refusal was not an option. By the time I left, half the women in town were arguing about whether they had treated you unfairly. I think you may find a more welcoming reception if you go back down there, though I would give it a few days." "You did not have to do that," Amelia said. "Yes, I did," Brett said simply. He began unloading the supplies, carrying them inside with ease. There were blankets and diapers made from soft cloth, baby clothes and gowns for Amelia, food supplies that would last for weeks, and a small cradle that someone had apparently insisted he take. "Mrs. Coleman, the midwife, she sent that," Brett said, nodding toward the cradle. "She said to tell you she was sorry, that she let her anger at Thomas cloud her judgment and she should have helped you regardless. She wanted to come up here herself to check on you, but I told her to give you some time." Amelia felt tears welling up. "She said that, after slamming the door in my face, people can change their minds when confronted with their own cruelty," Brett said. "Not everyone, but some. And I may have mentioned that if anything had happened to you or the baby because of their refusal to help, I would hold each of them personally responsible." "You threatened them," Amelia said, somewhere between shock and gratitude. "I strongly encouraged them to reconsider their actions," Brett corrected with a hint of amusement in his eyes. "There is a difference." That night, they ate dinner together at the small table, the baby asleep in her new cradle. Brett had cooked a stew that was surprisingly good, and Amelia found herself relaxing in his presence in a way she had not expected. They talked about small things at first: the weather, the quality of the supplies he had purchased, the beauty of the mountains. Then, gradually, the conversation deepened. "How long have you lived up here?" Amelia asked. "About 4 years," Brett said. "After things fell apart with Thomas and some other complications in town, I decided I preferred the company of nature to the company of most people. I built this cabin myself. I hunt, trap, and sell furs and meet in town when I need money, It is a simple life, but it suits me. Do you ever get lonely?" The question was out before Amelia could stop herself, and she immediately felt her cheeks flush. "I am sorry, that was too personal." "No, it is a fair question," Brett said, leaning back in his chair. "Yes, I get lonely sometimes. There are nights when the silence feels too heavy, when I wish there was someone to talk to. But I told myself it was better than dealing with the complications that come with being close to people. People lie, they disappoint you, they leave." "Not everyone," Amelia said softly. Brett looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw something shift in his expression. "No," he agreed quietly, "not everyone." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Amelia did not have a name for but could feel humming in the air like the promise of a storm. Then the baby made a small sound in her sleep, and the spell broke. Over the following days, they settled into an unexpected rhythm. Brett gave Amelia his bed and insisted on sleeping on the floor, despite her protests. He hunted and cooked, kept the cabin warm and safe, and never once made her feel like a burden. Amelia cared for the baby, whom she had named Grace, and slowly regained her strength. She also began to take over some of the household tasks, cooking meals and mending Brett's clothes, partly because she wanted to contribute but mostly because she wanted to feel useful, wanted to give him something in return for all he had given her. She watched him when he did not know she was looking. She noticed the way he moved, economical and purposeful despite his size. She noticed how gentle he was with Grace, how his huge hands could cradle her tiny body with infinite care. She noticed how he hummed while he worked, old songs that spoke of loneliness and longing. And she noticed how he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not paying attention, with an expression that made her heart race. One evening, about a week after Grace's birth, Amelia was sitting by the fire nursing the baby when Brett came in from chopping wood. His shirt was damp with sweat, despite the cooling evening air, and Amelia could see the muscles of his shoulders and arms flexing beneath the fabric. He caught her staring and paused. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "I was just thinking," Amelia said, feeling brave and foolish all at once, "that I am glad it was you who found me that day, that if it had to be someone, I am grateful it was you." Brett set down the armload of wood he was carrying and came to sit across from her. "I am glad, too," he said quietly. "These past few days, having you and Grace here, it has made me realize how empty this cabin was before, how empty I was, I suppose." "Brett," Amelia began, but she did not know how to finish the sentence. "How did you tell a man you barely knew that you were falling in love with him? How did you explain that his kindness had awakened something in you that you had not known existed?" "I know this is complicated," Brett said, as though reading her thoughts. "You just lost your husband. You just had a baby. The last thing you probably need is me confusing things further. But I need you to know, Amelia, that having you here, it is not a burden. It is a gift. You and Grace, you have brought life to this place. You have brought life to me." "It does not feel complicated," Amelia said softly. "Or maybe it should, but it does not. All I know is that when I look at you, I feel safe. I feel seen. And I feel something else too, something I am almost afraid to name." Brett leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes intense on hers. "I am afraid too," he admitted. "Afraid I am feeling too much too fast. Afraid I am taking advantage of your gratitude. Afraid that when you are stronger, when you do not need me anymore, you will realize I am just some mountain man who lives alone because he does not know how to be with people." "That is not what I see when I look at you," Amelia said firmly. "I see a man who risked himself for a stranger. I see a man who delivered my baby with shaking hands and tears in his eyes because he cared so much about doing it right. I see a man who reads poetry and keeps his home clean and cooks with care. I see a man who is strong enough to be gentle. That is what I see, Brett." He stood up then and crossed the small space between them. He knelt beside her chair, and even kneeling he was nearly at eye level with her. "I am falling in love with you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know it is too soon, and I know it is crazy, but I cannot help it. Every day, every moment I spend with you, I fall a little more. And I needed to tell you, even if it is the wrong time, even if you are not ready to hear it." Amelia reached out with her free hand and touched his bearded face, feeling the softness of the hair, the strength of his jaw beneath. "It is not the wrong time," she whispered. "And I am falling in love with you too. I think I started falling the moment you picked me up and carried me to safety, and I have not stopped since." Brett turned his head and kissed her palm, a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "I will take care of you," he promised. "Both of you. For as long as you will let me, I will be a father to Grace if you will allow it. I will give you the life you deserve, the life Thomas should have given you." "I do not want what Thomas would have given me," Amelia said. "I want what you are offering, what you have already given me. I want this life, here in this cabin with you." They sat there for a long time, Amelia nursing Grace, Brett kneeling beside her with his hand on her knee, the fire crackling softly in the background. When Grace finished nursing and fell asleep, Brett took her gently and placed her in the cradle. Then he helped Amelia to her feet and very carefully, very slowly, he pulled her into his arms. Amelia pressed her face against his chest and breathed in the scent of him, wood smoke and pine and something uniquely his. His arms came around her, strong and warm, and she felt protected in a way she had never felt before. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, neither speaking because words seemed inadequate for what they were feeling. "I need to court you properly," Brett said finally, pulling back slightly to look down at her. "I know we are past some of the usual stages, given everything that has happened, but I want to do this right. I want to give you time to grieve Thomas, to heal, to be sure about what you want." "I do not need to grieve Thomas," Amelia said honestly. "I know that sounds terrible, but it is the truth. I barely knew him, and what I knew turned out to be lies. I am sad that Grace will never know her father, but I cannot mourn a man I never truly had. As for being sure about what I want, I am already sure. But if you need time, I will give it to you." Brett laughed, a sound of pure joy and relief. "I do not need time, but I want to court you anyway. I want to do things properly. I want to bring you flowers and compliment you and ask you proper questions and learn everything about you. Can I do that?" "Yes," Amelia said, smiling through her tears. "Yes, you can court me, Brett Rawlins." And so he did. Over the following weeks, as Amelia healed and Grace grew stronger, Brett courted her with a combination of mountain man practicality and unexpected romance. He brought her wildflowers every morning, presenting them with a solemnity that made her laugh and cry at the same time. He carved toys for Grace and a beautiful jewelry box for Amelia. He took them on short walks around the cabin area, showing Amelia the beauty of the mountains, the hidden waterfalls and meadows that he had discovered in his years alone. He told her stories about his childhood, about growing up in Nebraska territory, when it was even wilder than it was now, about losing his parents to fever when he was 16 and making his own way ever since. Amelia told him about her own past, about growing up in Boston as the only child of a shopkeeper and his wife, about her mother dying when she was 12 and her father following 5 years later, leaving her alone in the world. She told him about the series of jobs she had taken, working as a seamstress and a teacher, barely scraping by until Thomas had come along with his promises of a better life. She told him about the shame she felt at having been so easily fooled, and Brett held her hand and told her that trusting someone was not something to be ashamed of, that Thomas's lies were his fault, not hers. They talked for hours every evening after Grace went to sleep, sitting by the fire, learning each other's thoughts and dreams and fears. Brett told her he had always wanted a family, but had convinced himself he was not the kind of man who could have one. Amelia told him he was exactly the kind of man who should have a family, that any child would be lucky to have him as a father. One evening, about a month after Grace's birth, Brett took Amelia's hand and led her outside. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. He turned to face her, and she saw nervousness in his eyes. "I know we agreed I would court you properly," he said, "and I feel like I have barely started. But I also know what I want, and I do not see the point in waiting when I am already certain. Amelia, I love you. I love Grace. I want to marry you, not because I feel obligated, not because you need someone to take care of you, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life. Will you marry me?" Amelia felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy this time, pure, uncomplicated joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Brett, I will marry you. I love you so much, and I cannot imagine my life without you either." Brett pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "I went to town yesterday while you were napping with Grace. I wanted to do this properly." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small sapphire stone. "The jeweler said the sapphire is the color of your eyes. I thought it was perfect." Amelia looked at the ring and felt her heart swell. It was nothing like the gaudy diamond Thomas had given her, which she had sold to the jeweler in North Platte to pay for some of the supplies. This ring was simple and beautiful and chosen with thought and care. "It is perfect," she whispered. Brett slipped the ring onto her finger and then, very gently, he cupped her face in his large hands and kissed her. It was their first kiss, and it was everything Amelia had dreamed it would be. His lips were soft despite his rough exterior, and he kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of his love and respect. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I am going to make you so happy," Brett promised. "I am going to spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you and Grace have everything you need and most of what you want." "You already make me happy," Amelia said. "Happier than I ever thought possible." They were married 2 weeks later in North Platte, in a small ceremony at the church. The town had indeed changed its attitude toward Amelia, and several of the women who had initially refused to help her came to apologize and to bring gifts for Grace. Mrs. Coleman, the midwife, was particularly effusive in her apologies, and she examined both Amelia and Grace to ensure they were healthy and healing well. The ceremony itself was simple but beautiful. Amelia wore a new dress that Brett had insisted on buying her, a soft blue that matched her eyes and the sapphire in her ring. Brett wore new clothes too, though he had refused to cut his hair or beard, and Amelia was glad because she loved him exactly as he was. Grace slept peacefully through the ceremony, nestled in the arms of Mrs. Coleman, who had tearfully asked if she could hold the baby as a way of making amends. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Brett kissed Amelia with such enthusiasm that the small crowd of witnesses laughed and applauded. Amelia felt surrounded by joy, by hope, by the promise of a future that looked nothing like what she had imagined, but was so much better. They returned to the cabin as husband and wife, and Brett carried Amelia over the threshold even though she protested that he had already carried her once before. "That was different," he insisted. "That was me saving your life. This is me bringing my wife home." That night, after Grace was asleep in her cradle, Brett made love to Amelia with the same combination of gentleness and passion that characterized everything he did. He was careful with her, aware that she was still healing from childbirth, but his touch was reverent, worshipful even. Amelia felt cherished in a way she had never experienced, and when it was over, she lay in his arms feeling complete. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Brett murmured, his large hand stroking her hair. "Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for giving me this chance." "Thank you for finding me," Amelia said. "Thank you for not turning away like everyone else." "I could never turn away from you," Brett said simply. "From the moment I saw you, I knew you were meant to be mine. I just did not know how it would happen. But the universe has a way of bringing people together when they are meant to be." The months that followed were full of simple joys. Brett taught Amelia how to hunt and trap, skills she had never imagined she would need, but found she enjoyed learning. She taught him how to read more complex poetry and helped him improve his already decent cooking. Together, they created a home in that small mountain cabin, filling it with laughter and love and the everyday moments that make a life. Grace grew strong and healthy, her tiny features developing into something uniquely her own. She had Amelia's eyes and Thomas's dark hair, but her temperament was pure sunshine. She rarely cried, instead observing the world around her with solemn curiosity. Brett doted on her completely, and Amelia often found him holding the baby and talking to her in that deep, rumbling voice, telling her stories or singing old songs. "You are going to be strong," he would tell Grace. "Strong like your mama. You are going to be brave and smart and kind. And I am going to make sure you know how loved you are, every single day." Watching him with Grace, Amelia fell even more deeply in love with her husband. He never once treated Grace as anything other than his daughter, never mentioned that she was not his by blood. When people in town asked, he simply said she was his daughter, end of story, and his tone made it clear that anyone who questioned it would have him to deal with. Winter came to the mountains, bringing snow that turned their world into a white wonderland. Brett had stocked the cabin with enough supplies to last until spring, and they settled into a cozy routine. On the coldest nights, they would all sleep together in the bed, Grace nestled between them, the fire burning low. Amelia would wake sometimes in the early morning hours to find Brett watching her and Grace with an expression of such profound contentment that it made her throat tight with emotion. "What are you thinking?" she would ask. "That I am the luckiest man alive," he would always answer. Spring came slowly to the mountains, melting the snow and revealing the world beneath. Grace was nearly a year old now, beginning to pull herself up on furniture and babble in sounds that almost resembled words. One afternoon in late April, as Amelia was preparing dinner and Brett was chopping wood outside, she heard Grace make a very distinct sound. "Papa." Amelia froze, then turned to look at Grace, who was pulling herself up on the side of her cradle. "What did you say, sweetheart?" "Papa," Grace repeated, more clearly this time. Amelia ran to the door and called for Brett. He came immediately, concern on his face. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Amelia said, laughing and crying at the same time. Grace just said her first word. Brett's eyes widened. "What did she say?" "Papa," Amelia told him. "She called you Papa." Brett stood very still for a moment, and Amelia saw tears begin to slide down his bearded face. He walked over to the cradle and picked up Grace, holding her close. "Say it again," he whispered. "Please, sweetheart, say it again." "Papa," Grace said obligingly, patting his face with her small hand. Brett held her tight, his shoulders shaking with emotion. Amelia came over and wrapped her arms around both of them, and they stood there as a family, bound not by blood but by something even stronger, by love and choice and commitment. That summer, Amelia discovered she was pregnant again. She told Brett one evening after Grace was asleep, nervous about how he would react. But his face lit up with such joy that her nervousness vanished instantly. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." "Yes," Amelia said. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Brett said, pulling her into his arms. "Amelia, you have given me everything I ever wanted. A family, a home, a purpose. Now we are going to have a baby together, a piece of both of us. I could not be happier if I tried." This pregnancy was different from the first. Amelia was healthy and well cared for, with no stress or fear to complicate things. Brett was attentive to the point of being comical, insisting she rest constantly, refusing to let her do any heavy work. Mrs. Coleman came up from town several times to check on her, pronouncing her in excellent health and assuring Brett that Amelia was perfectly capable of her normal activities. "You cannot wrap her in cotton wool," the midwife told him with exasperation. "She is having a baby, not dying of consumption." But Brett could not help himself. He had come so close to losing Amelia once, and he was determined to make sure nothing went wrong this time. Their son was born in February of 1880, on a cold but clear morning. Mrs. Coleman attended the birth this time, with Brett hovering nervously nearby. The delivery was quick and uncomplicated, and when the midwife placed the baby boy in Amelia's arms, she looked up at Brett with tears of joy. "A son," she said. "We have a son." Brett came to the bed and looked down at the tiny baby, his eyes full of wonder. "He is perfect," he whispered. What should we name him? They had discussed names, but Amelia had been waiting to see the baby before deciding. Now, looking at his small face, she knew exactly what his name should be. "Benjamin," she said. "Benjamin Thomas Rawlins." Benjamin for his father, and Thomas so that Grace will always have a connection to her first father, even if she never knew him. Brett looked at her with such love that Amelia felt her heart might burst. "Benjamin Thomas," he repeated. "It is perfect. You are perfect. I love you so much, Amelia." "I love you too," she said. "Thank you for giving me this life, this family. Thank you for being the man you are." Grace, who was just over a year and a half old, was fascinated by her new brother. She would sit beside Amelia and gently touch the baby's tiny hands, saying "Baby Ben" over and over. Brett watched his children with an expression of fierce protectiveness and deep love, and Amelia knew that they were all exactly where they were meant to be. The years that followed were full and rich. They had two more children, daughters named Elizabeth and Sarah, born in 1882 and 1884. The cabin became too small for their growing family, so Brett built an addition, doubling its size. He also built a proper barn for their livestock and expanded his trapping business into a more legitimate trading operation. The family went to town more often now, and Amelia became known as a kind and generous woman who helped other new mothers and taught children to read. Grace grew into a bright, curious child who loved following her father into the mountains. Benjamin was quieter but intensely loyal, always looking out for his younger sisters. Elizabeth was spirited and adventurous, while Sarah was gentle and thoughtful. Together, they filled the cabin with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family life. One evening in the summer of 1886, when Grace was 8 and Sarah was 2, Amelia and Brett sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Grace was teaching Benjamin how to identify animal tracks, while Elizabeth chased butterflies and Sarah picked wildflowers with intense concentration. "You ever regret it?" Amelia asked quietly. "Giving up your solitary life for all this chaos?" Brett turned to look at her, his storm-cloud eyes full of love and contentment. "Not for a single second," he said firmly. "That solitary life was not living, not really. It was just existing. All of this is life. This is what I was meant for." I just did not know it until the day a stubborn, brave woman stumbled into town wearing a ruined wedding dress and refused to give up even when everyone else had given up on her. Amelia leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him, the warmth that had become home to her. "I was not brave," she said. "I was terrified." "Bravery is not the absence of fear," Brett said. "It is doing what needs to be done despite the fear. You walked 6 hours through the wilderness in labor. You kept fighting for your baby even when everyone told you no. You trusted a stranger to help you. You chose to build a life in these mountains when you could have gone back east. You are the bravest person I know, Amelia Rawlins." "We did it together," Amelia corrected. "You delivered my baby with shaking hands, remember? You were terrified too, but you did it anyway. That is bravery." "I guess we are both brave then," Brett said with a smile. He took her hand and raised it to his lips, kissing the spot where her wedding ring sat. "And I am grateful every day that I found you, that you let me into your life, that you gave me this family." "I am grateful too," Amelia said softly, "for all of it, even the hard parts, because they led me here to you, to this life." They sat there as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, their children playing nearby, and Amelia thought about how strange and wonderful life was. She had come to North Platte as a desperate pregnant widow with nowhere to go, and she had found not just shelter but home. She had found not just survival but love. She had found not just help but family. The man who had delivered her baby with shaking hands had become her husband, the father of her children, the love of her life. The little girl born in fear and pain had become a bright, happy child surrounded by siblings and love. The cabin that had once housed a lonely man now rang with laughter and life. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Brett called the children in for bed. There was the usual chaos of washing faces and putting on nightclothes, of telling stories and singing lullabies. Grace wanted to hear again about the night she was born, a story that had become family legend. Brett told it, his voice gentle in the firelight, about how her mama had been the bravest woman in the world and how he had been so scared, but had done his best because some things were worth facing your fears for. "And then you were born," he told Grace, "and you were the most beautiful baby I had ever seen, and I knew that everything had happened exactly as it was supposed to. You were supposed to be born here in this cabin with me helping, because that is how our family began." Grace smiled sleepily and hugged him tight. "I am glad you helped me be born, Papa." "Me too, sweetheart," Brett said, his voice thick with emotion. "Me too." After all the children were asleep, Brett and Amelia stood together in the doorway between the main room and the sleeping area, looking at their children. 4 small bodies, peaceful in sleep, each one a miracle, each one a testament to the power of love and perseverance. "I want more," Brett said suddenly, quietly. "If you are willing, I want to fill this house with as many children as you want to give me. I want our family to grow. I want to spend the rest of my life building this life with you." Amelia turned to look at him, this mountain man who had rescued her, who had delivered her baby, who had given her everything she had ever dreamed of and more. "I want that too," she said. "I want all of it, every part of this life with you." He pulled her close and kissed her, a kiss that held promises and passion and a decade's worth of love still to come. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "How did I get so lucky?" Brett wondered aloud. "We both got lucky," Amelia corrected. "The universe brought us together at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way. Everything that happened, all the hard parts and the painful parts, they led us here. And I would not change a single moment because it gave us this." They stood there in the quiet cabin, holding each other, surrounded by the evidence of their love, and Amelia knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The scared, desperate woman who had stumbled into North Platte 8 years ago was gone, replaced by someone stronger, someone loved, someone home. Outside, the mountains stood silent and eternal under the stars. Inside, a family slept peacefully, bound together by love that had been forged in the most unlikely circumstances. A pregnant bride refused by every midwife in town had found salvation in the shaking hands of a mountain man, and in doing so, they had both found everything they had been searching for. Their story was not one of convenience or obligation. It was a story of choice, of two people who had looked at each other in the darkest moment and decided to build something beautiful together. It was a story of courage and kindness, of second chances and new beginnings. It was a story of love, pure and simple, the kind that transforms lives and creates families, and turns a lonely cabin in the mountains into a home filled with laughter and life. And as Amelia fell asleep that night in her husband's arms, their children breathing softly in the next room, she sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the day she had stumbled into North Platte, for the midwives who had turned her away, for the mountain man who had not, and for every moment since that had led her to this perfect, imperfect, beautiful life. Years continued to pass in their mountain sanctuary. True to their conversation, Brett and Amelia had two more children, twin boys named Jacob and Samuel, born in 1888. The cabin required yet another expansion, and Brett built it with the help of some men from town who had become genuine friends over the years. The old prejudices against Amelia had long since faded, replaced by respect and admiration for the woman who had overcome such adversity and built such a loving family. Grace grew into a young woman who inherited her mother's determination and her father's love of the mountains. She learned tracking and hunting from Brett, but also reading and mathematics from Amelia. Benjamin became his father's right hand in the trading business, showing an aptitude for negotiation and numbers that surprised everyone. The younger children grew wild and free in the mountain air, their laughter echoing through the valleys. One afternoon in 1895, when Grace was 17, she came home with a young man named Daniel, a surveyor working in the area. Brett was immediately suspicious, his protective instincts flaring, but Amelia put a hand on his arm and reminded him that Grace was old enough to make her own choices. "She is still my little girl," Brett protested. "She is a woman now," Amelia said gently. "A strong, capable woman who knows her own mind, just like her mother." Brett grumbled but relented, and Daniel proved himself to be a good man, respectful and hardworking. When he asked Brett for permission to marry Grace the following year, Brett gave his blessing, though not without a lengthy conversation about the responsibilities of being a husband and the consequences of failing to live up to them. The wedding was held at the cabin in the summer of 1896, a joyous affair that brought together their extended family and friends from town. As Brett walked Grace down the makeshift aisle to where Daniel waited, Amelia saw tears streaming down her husband's face. "Who knew you were such a soft-hearted man?" she teased him later after the celebration had ended. "I am not soft-hearted," Brett protested. "I just had something in my eye for several hours, during the entire ceremony." Amelia laughed and kissed him. "You cried at all their births, too." And whenever they learned something new, and when Benjamin caught his first fish, and when Elizabeth performed in the school play. "And all right, Brett said, pulling her close. "Maybe I am a little soft-hearted, but only for my family, for you and our children. Everyone else thinks I am terrifying." "Everyone else is wrong," Amelia said. "Well, mostly wrong. You can be terrifying when someone threatens the people you love, but to us, you are just Papa, our protector and our biggest supporter and the man who makes us feel safe enough to be brave." As they grew older, Brett and Amelia watched their children build their own lives. Benjamin married a schoolteacher from North Platte. Elizabeth shocked everyone by becoming a doctor, one of the first women in Nebraska to do so. Sarah married a rancher and had 5 children of her own. The twins both became scouts and guides, leading expeditions through the mountains they knew so well. Through it all, Brett and Amelia remained each other's anchor. They still sat on the porch every evening, watching the sun set over the mountains, still held hands when they walked, still looked at each other with the same love that had bloomed in the midst of crisis so many years before. In 1910, when Amelia was 51 and Brett was 53, they became great-grandparents for the first time when Grace's daughter had a baby girl. Brett held the infant with the same gentle reverence he had shown when holding his own children, and Amelia watched him with tears in her eyes. "Do you remember the night Grace was born?" she asked him later. "I remember every moment of it," Brett said. "Your hands were shaking so badly I thought you were going to drop her." "I was terrified," Brett admitted, "more scared than I had ever been in my life. But I looked at you, at your strength and courage, and I knew I could do it. You have always made me braver than I am, Amelia." "We make each other brave," Amelia corrected. She took his weathered hand in hers, noting how their hands had aged together, how they fit together perfectly after all these years. "We always have." They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary in 1909, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends. The cabin that had once housed a solitary man now overflowed with family, 3 generations worth of love and life. Brett stood up at one point during the celebration and raised his glass. "30 years ago," he said, his voice still strong despite his age, "a woman stumbled into my life when I least expected it and most needed it. She was brave and stubborn and beautiful, and she changed everything. Amelia, you have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. You have given me children and grandchildren, love and laughter, purpose and joy. Every day with you has been a gift, and I look forward to however many more years we are blessed to have together." Amelia stood and joined him, raising her own glass. "And 31 years ago," she said, "when I was at my lowest point, when I had been rejected by everyone and had nowhere to turn, a mountain man with kind eyes and shaking hands saved my life and our daughter's life. Brett, you showed me what real love looks like. You showed me that family is not just about blood but about choice and commitment. You have been my rock, my shelter, my home. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." The assembled family cheered and raised their glasses, and Brett pulled Amelia close and kissed her in front of everyone, just as he had at their wedding all those years ago. As the years continued to pass, Brett and Amelia slowed down but never stopped living fully. They still walked the mountain trails together, though more slowly now. They still sat on the porch every evening, though Brett needed a blanket even in summer now, and Amelia's joints ached in the cold. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened, enriched by decades of shared experiences, of weathering storms together, of building a life brick by brick. In 1918, when they were celebrating Grace's 40th birthday, Amelia looked around at the gathered family and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Grace was there with her husband and 3 children. Benjamin and his wife had 4 children of their own. Elizabeth, despite never marrying, had become a renowned physician and was training the next generation of doctors. Sarah was surrounded by her large, boisterous family. The twins, Still bachelor mountain men like their father had been, were entertaining the children with exaggerated stories of their adventures. "What are you thinking?" Brett asked, coming to stand beside her. "I am thinking about how it all started," Amelia said. "About that terrifying day when I thought I was going to die, when no one would help me, when everything seemed hopeless. And then you appeared like something out of a story and you saved us." "You saved yourself," Brett said firmly. "You walked 6 hours through the wilderness. You survived when anyone else would have given up. I just provided a safe place for you to be strong." "You provided so much more than that," Amelia said. "You provided love when I had none. You provided family when I was alone. You provided a future when I could not see past the next moment. You provided everything, Brett." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, the same heart that had chosen her all those years ago. Around them, their family laughed and celebrated, living proof of the choice they had made to build something beautiful out of desperate circumstances. "You have any regrets?" Brett asked quietly. "Not a single one," Amelia said immediately. "Everything in my life led me to you, to this family, to this moment. How could I regret any of it?" "I feel the same way," Brett said. "Even the hard parts, the painful parts, they were worth it because they brought us here." They stood there together. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely way, who had built a life that had seemed impossible, who had loved each other through joy and sorrow, through triumph and hardship, through every season of life. They were older now, gray-haired and wrinkled, but the connection between them was as strong as it had been that first night in the cabin when Brett had delivered Grace with shaking hands, and Amelia had seen in him everything she needed. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in the familiar shades of orange and purple that had marked so many of their evenings together, Amelia sent up a prayer of thanks. Thanks for the midwives who had turned her away, because it had led her to Brett. Thanks for the mountain man who had not turned away, who had opened his home and his heart. Thanks for the daughter born in crisis, who had become the foundation of their family. Thanks for the love that had sustained them through decades, that had grown stronger with each passing year, that would last as long as they both lived and beyond. In the cabin that had once been a lonely refuge, filled now with the sounds of family and love, Brett and Amelia Rawlins held each other close and watched another day end in their mountain paradise. Their story had begun in desperation and fear, but it had blossomed into something beautiful, something lasting, something that would echo through generations. The pregnant bride who had been refused by every midwife in town had found her salvation in the mountain man who delivered her baby with shaking hands. And in doing so, they had both found everything they had been searching for: home, family, purpose, and a love that would last a lifetime and beyond. It was a love story written in the mountains, carved into the landscape of their lives, and it would endure as long as the peaks themselves stood tall against the sky.